Writer's Blues by Samantha Flanagan, narrated by Stephen Ragsdale. John Anderson sat alone in the tavern, cushioned up in a corner booth. Other than Katina sleeping in the back, he was the only soul left in the entire place that he could see. He opened his laptop and powered it on, frantically looking through his messy desktop for his writing project folder. He soon found it labeled, Untitled Story Version 3.5. It had been a long journey for John. 3 years to be exact, with constant rewrites and edits. But now he had a sense of relief. It was nearly over. The wait of 3 years would soon be gone, and he would have a completed story. Okay, he started. I just need to rewrite the last chapter and send it to Mr. Monroe by tomorrow morning. And nothing is going to slow me down, John said with glee as he started going through his previous chapters and entries. John took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He stared at the clock on his computer. It read 12 a.m. John's fingers began to tremble. Off in the distance, a lone payphone ideally sits and waits. Suddenly, a ring echoes throughout the tavern. John's shoulders twitch with fright. Oh, shit, he whispered. He leans over to see the old payphone ring. John quickly looked back towards the back door and remembered the sleeping bartender. Shit, John said as he frantically shuffled his way out of the booth, scrambled towards the phone, and picked it up. His left slipper lay alone on the floor, having fallen off during the chaos. A gruff voice on the other end of the line reaches John's ear.
John boy, is that you?
The gruff voice called out.
You remember your own publisher, right? Look, I know where you are, as I've tried to call your phone, your house, hell, even your own mother, and I got no answer. I know you're there, John. I can hear your hesitation. A good publisher can whiff that stuff a mile away, the voice said. Listen, I'm putting the pressure on you because I love your work. Really, I mean, an action-adventure novel with an Old West cowboy, a time traveler, and an immortal being seeking lost gold in the hills is brilliant. I love it. But I need that novel by sunrise, John. And I don't care if you have to kill your own grandmother or your main character to get it done. You have roughly 7 hours. I'll be waiting.
The man barked as the phone's receiver clicked. A low-toned sound accompanied John as he stood alone, shaking in his dirty old bathrobe. John slowly looked at the phone and carefully placed it back on the receiver. Oh, crap, he said as he began to pace back and forth. He clasped his hands over his mouth and took a deep breath. All right, he said with vigor. I can do this. 3 years and I'm on the home stretch. I can finish it tonight, John said as he turned towards his laptop and marched towards the booth. His eyes suddenly widened as he stopped himself halfway. He slipped his foot back into the lost slipper. Even if I have to. John paused for a moment, took his glasses off, and rubbed the brow of his nose. Damn it, Ellipses. Why did you have to go and be the hero? You could have just stayed behind and everything would be fine. But I can fix this. I know there's a way. John plopped himself back into the booth and started to write. Time moves oddly in the tavern. 5 minutes can sometimes feel like an eternity, and an eternity can sometimes feel like 5 minutes. John typed feverishly. Sweat started to drip from the side of his head as his hands danced across the keyboard. In a moment, he blinked and soon found himself starting to slump over. The need for sleep was putting weight on his shoulders and dragging him down ever so slowly into the abyss of dreams. John shot himself back up just as the lure of rest was about to consume him. He slapped his face a few times and tugged on his hair. The time on his computer read 1 a.m. Come on, man. No, John said as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a little pill bottle. The bottle read, Waco pills, 255 milligrams. Ah, my old friend, come here, John said as he twisted the cap. Horror and fear swept across his face as he gazed into the emptiness of the bottle. He let out a soft cry, and his trembling hands released the bottle onto the table. The ever-present lure of rest started to roll back as his shoulders started to slump. Wait, he said as he reached into his other pocket. Got a spare right here. But there was nothing in his other pocket. Deeper he fished his hand, only to find nothing. Nothing but a little hole. He stood up quickly and looked around. You little shit, where are you? I know you're here somewhere, he said as he ducked under the table. A rattling sound echoed and sailed through the air into John's ears, causing him to bump his head under the table. He let out a groan as he emerged from the table, stood up, and turned around. Standing across the tavern, behind the bar, was a man. He wore a dirty brown duster with a black cowboy hat, and in his hand was a bottle of Waco caffeine pills. He rattled them with a smirk on his face. "Come on, little one. I know you've been itching," he said, rattling the bottle again. Shock and dismay coated John's face as he looked at the mysterious stranger. "How?" John asked. The man placed the bottle on the counter. John looked at the bottle and then at the front door. The deadbolt was still engaged. The door hadn't moved. "I don't know how you got here or what you want, but..." The man snatched the bottle from the counter and suddenly disappeared from his hand. "Ta-da!" the man said. "Magic, boy." "Hey, I need those," John said as he moved quickly over to the bar. "Asshole, give them back." My, what fine, pretty language and a perfect description of yours truly, I must say," the man said with a grin as he took a step back. John slumped on top of the counter with one arm tucked and the other stretched out. "Come on, mister. I need those for my novel. I've got a lot of work to do and so little time left to do it, and I can't get anything done with some ass clown in a cowboy hat playing games with me. And how the hell did you even sneak in here? Where were you? Just here all along? And how did you..." John frantically spat out. The man quickly waved his hands in front of himself. "Whoa there, Slick. You're running about 1,000 miles a minute, and I'm too sober for this," the man said as he turned around. "Ah, bourbon. God's gift to man," he said as he pulled a bottle of bourbon from the shelf and turned back to John. The man bit into the cork, popped it off the bottle, and spat it onto the ground. "Cheers," he said as he started to drink from the bottle. John remained silent as the stranger drank. "Are you done?" John spluttered as the man released his lips from the bottle. "What's the hurry, kid?" John took a deep breath. "I told you, I have to finish my work, and I need those caffeine pills to stay awake." The man reached over and grabbed John's trembling hand. "Look at you. You're already barely hanging on." "I'm fine." How long since he had a decent night's rest? 2, maybe 3 days? The man said as he let go of John's hand. John recoiled back from the bar. "That's none of your business." "The future of your little novel and what you put in it is my business, kid. I'd hate for you to spin out of control from burnout and write yourself into another corner, just like the mess you're in now. You need rest, and little white sugar pills ain't gonna help you." John squinted his eyes and looked the man up and down. "Who are you?" "Ah, John, I thought you, being a writer and all, would mean you got some brains in there," the man said, pointing towards John's forehead. "All right, trivia time. I was born in a little shack in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. Moved my ass west to California for fortune and glory. I have a deep love of alcohol, gambling, and stealing from unsuspecting idiots such as yourself." The man waved his hand once more, and suddenly the bottle reappeared in his hand. John took a second to listen and comprehend what he'd just heard, and suddenly something clicked. "Jack Duster?" John whispered. "The rugged drunk outlaw from my book." Jack let out a small chuckle. "Such kind and elegant words, my boy. I am truly flattered," Jack said as he placed his hand on his chest. "I've finally lost it," John said as his eyes grew wide and he sat at the bar. "Kid, you never could have lost what you never had," Jack said as he placed the pill bottle in front of John. "Reckon I see it. You have 2 choices. Continue down the downward spiral primrose path that you are already on, or you can clean yourself up a bit tonight, finish your little book on time, then get yourself some proper help," Jack said as he leaned over the counter. John stared in silence at the pill bottle. He slowly moved his hands towards the bottle. Jack's eyes grew wary. John's fingers curled and flicked the bottle off the counter and onto the floor. Jack looked at the bottle on the floor and back at John. Well, shit. You made a wise choice, partner, Jack said. John only nodded. Well, now that we got those unpleasantness and feel-good story beats out of the way, how about moving on to other business? I got some mighty suggestions for that little story of yours, Jack said as he stood up. John immediately looked back at Jack and shook his head. No, no, no. I will not be taking any advice from anyone, especially you. I have a plan. I can rewrite a few things, fix everything, and save everyone, John said as he stood up from the bar and started to walk back towards the booth. Wait, kid, hear me out. It's true. No one has to die in the end, but if someone has to, let it be me. I could go out in a blaze of glory, surrounded by riches beyond my wildest dreams. It was my idea, after all, to go into the mine and collect our bounty, Jack said as he reached for the bottle of bourbon. But instead, you have me shot like a lame dog and have to be rescued by the comic relief and Captain Sadsack. I said no, John said as he sat back in the booth. I'm going to take a quick nap here, and when I wake up, you better be gone. Jack raised his hands. All right. Settle down your nerves. It was merely a suggestion. But hurry it up, will you? I ain't got all night. John rolled his eyes and looked back, but Jack was gone. All that was left was a lone bottle of bourbon on the counter, the cork still missing. John fiddled with his computer, opened a clock app, and set an alarm. Just give myself an hour or two. That's all I need. It's all I can spare for now, John said as he set the alarm. John leaned back and soon was engulfed in much-needed rest. Sleep is a necessary thing, but it can also be very delicate. The slightest twitch in the air can disturb a man in the midst of a deep, much-needed rest. The iron claws of reality reach through the world of dreams to grab you and pull you back at lightning speed, only for you to be met with a cold sweat and a racing heart. Alarm clocks are like that. John's alarm clock, however, was nothing like a normal alarm clock. The earth-shattering rhythmic fashion of a guitar solo broke John out of his peaceful slumber, causing him to fall out of the booth and land right on the hard floor. He felt his heart race, and a cold sweat poured from his forehead as he looked around, blinking and mumbling to himself. What? Who? He called out, and he soon turned his head towards the direction of the stage. A short woman with blue hair wrapped in a messy ponytail stood at the center of the stage. She was armed with a shiny red guitar and a chaotic smile. Good morning, Vietnam, she yelled out as if she were on a stage in front of a crowd of thousands. She played a few more notes from her guitar before she leaped from the center of the stage and planted herself right in front of John. Oh, good, you're awake, she said. John scrambled to pick himself up as his ears were still ringing. Panic soon crept up his spine as he looked from the woman to the back door. Shh, you crazy bitch, John whispered to the woman. You're going to wake the bartender in the back there, he said, pointing towards the back door. The woman turned and looked towards the back door. She casually waved her hand. That old bag is still asleep. You're still fine, the woman said reassuringly. The woman quickly turned back towards John. John looked at the woman and grunted. Oh, Christ, it's you. Skyra, John said disappointedly. Skyra smiled. Yep, she said with a big smile. The sheriff of Nottingham told me you needed help writing, and so here I am, Skyra said as she stretched her arms. John shook his head. No. Tell Jack I don't need help. I don't need anyone's help, John said as he turned around and headed back towards the booth. In the blink of an instant, his laptop suddenly disappeared from the table. John panicked and looked around, only to see Skyra holding his laptop and fiddling with the keys. Hey, stop that! What are you doing? John said as he moved closer to Skyra. Skyra paused and looked up at John. Some light reading. Got a good start, but you're lacking a few things, she said. John reached for the laptop, but suddenly Skyra and the laptop vanished and reappeared on top of the bar counter. Stop with your time-pausing bullshit, John called out as he hurried towards the bar counter. Skyra shrugged and she closed the laptop, You're the one who wrote me like this, so this is really all your fault, she said, looking down at the lone bottle near her feet. She gently tapped the bottle with her foot, causing it to fall off the counter and shatter on the floor. John winced as he hurried on top of the counter, facing Skyra. Enough of this, all right? Give me back my laptop, John said as he reached out and grabbed his laptop from Skyra. Skyra raised her hands and took a step back. All right, geez, just trying to help, she said. No, you never help. Your solution to most of your problems has been to either blow it up or spray paint it blue and then blow it up again, John said. He looked like he was about to keep talking, but then he paused for a moment and looked at his laptop. His eyebrows raised and his eyes widened. He looked back at Skyra, who was grinning at him as she took a step back and placed her hands on her hip. You're the one who found the stash of dynamite in the mines and planted them when you heard Wild Pete coming, John said. Ha! I think you got it now, Skyra said, clapping her hands, then suddenly blurred from view and reappeared next to the jukebox. No good songs here, she said as she started clicking the buttons. No power either. Piece of junk won't even turn on. The jukebox stared back at Skyra in silence. John gingerly crawled off the counter with the laptop in hand until he was back on the floor. His slippers dropped to the floor and landed next to the pool table. Skyra looked back at John and blinked once more out of her space and appeared in front of the pool table holding up 3 pool balls. All right, here's the score, she started as she placed the pool balls on the table. 1, you have old John Wayne get shot. Not saying he didn't deserve it, but that's a hired gun right there out of the fight, Skyra said as she rolled one of the balls into a corner pocket. 2, she said as she sighed and rolled her eyes. You have me misstep and hit my head on a beam, she said as she rolled the second ball into the opposite corner pocket. Not going to forgive you for killing my fun. Bet that only leaves one person left against Wild Pete and his gang, she said, pointing at the lone 8-ball. Skyra vanished again and appeared behind John with a pool cue and a white ball. John immediately turned around in shock, still gripping his laptop. You know what you have to do. You know what needs to be done for the story to play out. And believe me, I didn't want this either, Skyra said as she placed the pool cue and the white ball on the table. I just wanted to have a fun little adventure with my longtime friend. This was supposed to be a Thelma and Louise type of adventure. But instead, it turns out to be Bonnie and Clyde. John blinked a few times. They both die in the end. Huh? John cleared his throat. Thelma and Louise and Bonnie and Clyde all die at the end of the story. Skyra waved her arms. Well, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or whatever. The point is, it was supposed to be fun, and now we're locked, and you've got to make a choice, and no cheap tricks either. John placed the laptop on the table. It's not going to be like that. I know what to do. I can fix all of this. I just need a bit more. But before John could finish, the payphone at the other end of the tavern started to ring once again. Skyra and John turned towards the payphone as it continued to ring. Oh, shit, John said as he ran towards the payphone. As he lifted the phone off the receiver, Skyra blinked and appeared right next to him, shoving her ear close to the handset. A familiar gruff voice emitted from the phone.
John, this is Butch Monroe again. I'll say this again in case you didn't hear me the first fucking time. Your deadline has been moved to this morning, 7 a.m. sharp. I want to see something in my inbox by then, or your contract will be terminated. I don't care what needs to get done. Get it done, Butch Monroe barked.
Skyra looked back at John and whispered, Guy sounds like a dick. Here, let's fix that. Skyra carefully reached for John's free hand and carried it over to the cable connecting the handset to the box. She wrapped his fingers around the cable. 1, 2, 3, she said as they pulled, yanking the cable out of the payphone. The handset went silent as the cable floated freely on the floor. John looked with shock at what had happened. His hands started to tremble. He looked back at Skyra, who looked at him with a grin. You know what to do, she said with a wink. She then started to walk away from John, humming to the tune of Let the Good Times Roll, adding a little pep in her step as she walked towards the stage. Come on, baby, while the thrill is on. Come on, baby, let's have some fun, Skyra sang as she danced towards the stage. Skyra leaped onto the stage and turned towards John. Come on, baby, let the good times roll. Roll all night long, Skyra sang. As she finished, she vanished without a trace. No tricks, no reappearing anywhere, just gone. John stood there in silence, still holding the disconnected handset. Without another word, he placed the handset back on the receiver, walked over to the pool table, and stared at the pool cue, the white ball, and the lone ball in front of the left corner pocket. John took a deep breath, took hold of his laptop, walked back towards the booth, sat down, and resumed writing. The hours ticked away as John continued to write, pausing moments only for a brief spell of rest and editing. The clock on his computer now read 5 a.m. He removed his glasses and wiped his brow as he reread his work. Fuck, he said. I messed up. Someone's not going to make it to the end. The crackling sound of a pool ball striking another ball broke the silence that hung heavy in the tavern. John jerked his head toward the noise, only to see a small woman standing in front of the pool table, rubbing chalk onto the pool cue with the white ball lined up with the 8-ball near the corner pocket. She had long black hair, a torn jacket, and pants with combat boots, and eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of many empires. Oh no, not you, John said. The woman leaned the pool cue on the table, pulled out a cigarette from her pocket, and lit it. Smoke poured from her nose and hung in the air as she looked towards John. Ah, poor baby, she said. Keep going, she said mockingly as she reached for the pool cue. Don't let me stop you. You're so close. John stood up. Come on, Ellipses. I know I can work around this. I can rearrange a few things so Wild Pete doesn't sneak up behind you with Jack's pistol. Besides, you're immortal. You can't die, he said as he approached the pool table. Ellipses tilted her head and squinted her eyes. Ageless, you tick, not immortal. You should know that by now, and not like you to cheapen the art of writing, John boy. You know as well as I do that there's a flow to storytelling, she said as she leaned over onto the table, lining up the pool cue with the white ball. Everything has its place in a story, she said, focusing on the white ball. Try to take a shortcut or divert the flow to your own benefit, and you ruin the story, Ellipses said as she looked up at John. Ellipses jerked her arm forward and skidded the white ball. The ball spun in circles but did not move from its placement on the table. See? Like that, she said as she stood up. John looked at the white ball, then backed up toward Ellipses. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, John said. I wanted to write a fun adventure for you all, and now in the end, I'm sorry. Ellipses placed the pool cue on the table. John, if it makes you feel any better, I am pretty tired. Tired? Ellipses nodded. One bite from that stupid apple, and suddenly I outlived my friends and family. I wandered the Western world from town to town, hoping that the effects would wear off. But they didn't. Friends come and go, and no one seems to understand what you were going through. The constant, never-ending pain of this cycle, Ellipses said as she placed her hands in her jacket pockets. Do you know what that does to someone? Makes things very fucking lonely. Give that a spin for 1,000 years, and suddenly you come out of it jaded and tired. And I am pretty tired of this. But that's what Skyra was for. She's the one who can go back in time and meet up with you, and be your constant pal. Yeah, but she's not ageless, and she can't be around all the time, leaving me, yet again, alone. I can't just let you go, John said as his voice choked. John, forcing someone to stay around when they are tired only prolongs the struggle. You can't save everyone. Sometimes you just gotta let people go. And besides, I get to go out as the hero of the story. Sounds like a pretty decent ending to me, Ellipses said with a small smile. Doesn't make it any easier. John said weakly. It's not supposed to. But I do hope it gives you some comfort, Ellipses said. Take the shot, John. Make it a good one, she said, nodding towards the pool cue. John hung his head low as he walked over towards the pool cue and picked it up. He looked back at Ellipses, who was still wearing her small smile. Thank you, she said, as John lined up the pool cue with the white ball. As the pool cue connected with the white ball, an echoing gunshot erupted throughout the tavern. The white ball collided with the 8-ball, sending it right into the corner pocket. John's ears rang and his vision went blurry. He shook his head and rubbed his eyes. Blood soaked through Ellipses' shirt as she stood there. Nothing lasts forever. Thank God, she said as she collapsed to the ground. John dropped the pool cue and ran over to her, only to see that her body had vanished. Tears started forming in John's eyes as he dropped to his knees and started to cry. Tears stained the floorboards. John stared at the floor for some time there before he wiped his eyes and stood up. He slowly made his way back to his booth and continued writing. It's a strange thing to stay up all night. 1 minute, it's dark, cold, and quiet. The next, the early morning sun shines through the window, casting a golden ray into the room. The birds start to chirp, and the world around you starts to come alive. The clock on John's computer read 6:50 a.m. John's computer made a few blimp noises before flashing a message onto his screen. Email sent. John leaned back and smiled. After a long night, it was done. That was a night, he said as he slowly closed his laptop and unplugged his computer. As John stood with his laptop and started to make his way towards the front door, the back door slowly opened up. Katina stood there in the doorway, bewildered. John? John froze in his tracks and slowly turned around. Morning, Katina. Did you sleep well? Katina looked around her at the scene. The payphone had been disconnected. There was a broken bottle of bourbon on the floor and a pool cue on the table. Katina took a deep breath. Yes, I got some well-deserved rest. Now I think it would be best for you to leave. I've got some cleaning to do, she said sternly. John nodded and scuttled his way out of the tavern. Fucking writers, Katina said as she looked around again at the tavern. As she began to sweep up the broken bottle, the front door swung open. A scruffy-looking man stumbled in, his eyes haggard and his beard unkempt. He wore a dirty orange cap, and his fingers were covered in soot. He waddled his way to the bar and waved at Katina. Morning, Kay. I need my breakfast, the man said. Katina poked her head up from behind the bar. Hey, Charles, she said. No Chardonnay yet. Might get a shipment next Tuesday. Charles frowned. Oh, that's all right, he said as he began to look around. Say, what happened here? Katina took a deep breath. Ghosts, she said. Charles nodded and furrowed his eyebrows. You should get a shotgun. Shotguns do better against ghosts than that old stick of yours, Charles said seriously. Katina chuckled to herself. Yeah, I might consider that. This has been Writer's Blues, a Tavern Tale story by Samantha Flanagan. Copyright 2026. Narrated by Stephen Ragsdale in partnership with Patron Muse Studios. Copyright 2026. We hope you enjoyed listening.